Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome today's program Ed Rusch, who's VP of Corporate Marketing at Elemica. And today we're going to talk about transforming the B2B buying experience, the role of consumers and supply chain operating networks. Now, if you look at how we as consumers, buy today, particularly with, the role that the internet is playing in e-commerce and mobile devices, social networking. I mean, all of those things have really transformed, the buying experience for us as consumers. How is that translating into the B2B realm, right? Our expectations started to change there. What can we learn from the B2C experience that's applicable and appropriate to incorporate in the B2B world? I mean, those are some of the questions that I think a lot of companies are beginning to think about and actually start taking some action around. So it's great to have Ed here with us today. Can kind of share his perspective, obviously working, with a leading supply chain operating network in terms of what some of their customers are doing perhaps, and kind of thinking about from this perspective, what does that mean for the future of the technology and the capabilities that they need to bring to the market. So great to have Ed on the program. I just want to remind those of you that are joining us live today that part of our goal here at Talking Logistics is to make this conversational. So if you do have a question for Ed as we're having our conversation here, you can do so via the post a question button or via the chat feature. And if it's a good and appropriate question, we have time, I'll certainly try to weave it into the conversation. So with that, Ed, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you for having me, Adrian. It's exciting to be here.
Well, great, Ed. I can't believe that this is really, considering how long you and I have been working together, this is the first time that you're on Talking Logistics. So, just like I always like to do whenever I bring someone new onto the program, I always like to get a sense of, how and why they got involved with this industry to begin with. So why don't you briefly just tell us a little bit about your career path, how you got involved in supply chain logistics and what your current role and responsibilities are there at Elemica.
Well, before getting into the supply chain space, I was the head of marketing for a company that serviced hospitals, clinics, and long-term care facilities throughout the U.S., so a big focus, obviously, on healthcare. And we were a pretty large $450 million company. We had locations all throughout the U.S., and we really cranked up a commercial endeavor to expand our footprint outside of the hospitals to get into that urgent care, nursing home facilities, and clinical work, which really impacted the business in a good way. And so as a result of that, the guy I was working for there ended up taking a job at this little supply chain network called Rubber Network in Atlanta. That was back in 2006. And it was owned essentially by the 10 customers. It was the tire and rubber industry. 10 of the 11 largest tire manufacturers around the world owned Rubber Network. They used it to manage their procurement and their extended supply chain. And all the revenue for that company came from those 10 companies. So essentially it was a small little consortium. And so the person I worked for in my previous employer said the task at hand is to break out of this consortium shell, take the solutions that we've built for the 10 tire and rubber companies, and expand them to see if they're commercially viable out there in the broader marketplace. So it took a bit of a chance and stepped out to see if the ability that I was able to do to create demand in the healthcare space could translate into the supply chain world. So my entry into it was really from a strict marketing and business development, demand generation type of role. And then as I spent time in it, it's kind of one of those things that the more you learn, the more you get sucked in, and have been working directly in the supply chain space ever since. So I started at Rubber Network in 2007. It was acquired and merged together with Elemica in 2009, and have been steadily taking on more and more of the marketing and demand generation responsibilities here at Elemica through to when they appointed me a VP of Global Marketing back in 2013.
No, great background. So, healthcare and logistics supply chain. I mean, arguably, two very distinct industries, but arguably two of the, most prominent industries in the global economy today, certainly here in the United States, and I would think, globally as well. And, obviously, back with the rubber network, you can point to that as, one of the early, if you will, examples of the supply chain operating network, model and the coming together of trading partners, to help, provide more efficient commerce, if you will. So, great background there. So let's talk now, kind of about the topic at hand. And let's start with, from your perspective, I mean, what are the biggest contrasts today between, the buying experience, again, that we have as consumers versus the buying experience that, as you see it, obviously with the customers you work with and that you help enable through your platform, the buying experience in the B2B world. I mean, what are the main contrasts?
Well, I think the business to consumer world has really led the charge with creating some pretty delightful and awesome buying experiences. What I mean by that is just much more transparency into the product, the quality of the service, the ability to consume or purchase that product real easily in a very streamlined way, reducing the amount of clicks, creating intuitive interfaces, creating a community of communication around those products, whether it be social or through reviews, and certainly the different platforms that those products become available, whether it's the traditional big box store or now, through platforms like Amazon, for example. And so there's this whole level of sophistication from a marketing demand generation perspective that B2C world has been leading the charge with, and then certainly creating a whole experience around that for the products that they sell to not only make it easier for consumers to buy them, but then certainly expand their markets and get into other markets much more easily and quickly, and to grow customers for those products. However, in the B2B world, it's not like we're not doing those things. However, the level, I think, of sophistication, the quality and whatnot, shows that we're a bit of a laggard relative to the B2C world, and I think there's things that are appropriate in that B2C buying experience that we can bring into the B2B world. And here at Elemica, and certainly in my role as a marketing head for the company, we're working real hard in order to take some of those delightful customer experiences that you are seeing in the B2C world and applying them into the B2B space here where appropriate. I think one of the things that we're seeing from a technology enablement perspective, what we're seeing with regards to communities of people and buyers working together on a network, is that there really is a blurring of the lines between B2C and B2B, where I would make the argument that one day here in the near future, what's really happening is a business to individual or a business to human type of marketing experience, to where you're not going to see these traditional B2C and B2B delineations between the experiences, and it's all going to be business to a person or business to an individual. And again, technology and the ability to tailor and craft messages and to reach people across various channels is really going to enable all businesses, whether they're targeting other businesses or targeting consumers, to bring their message directly to the particular individuals that are their buyers.
Yeah, that's a lot of great food for thought there. I mean, certainly I think I can't think of anyone in the B2B world talking about the buying experience or any kind of process within B2B as being delightful. I think I think it's a good question to think about. I mean, what would be a delightful experience in a B2B realm? And I think I think having come from the corporate world early on in my career when I worked at Motorola and Polaroid, I mean, I know back working there, a lot of it was just all the red tape and all the layers of approvals or communication that needed to happen just to get what on the surface would have seemed kind of a simple transaction, kind of executed. So I think part of the opportunity, I believe, is, helping to, streamline that level of communication and approval, just to kind of, again, unwind some of that red tape that I think, is a lot of companies and a lot of B2B processes are still mired in. Do you agree?
No, I totally agree. I think that's one of the biggest areas of opportunity in this supply chain operating network space, one that we're addressing here at Elemica, and one that I think is going to be demanded of our buyers, respective of Elemica buyers or other business network buyers out there in the marketplace, is to remove the friction of implementing a full-scale supply chain program on the business network and removing some of those legacy, whether it be documents or heavy processes or really heavy terms and conditions, and bringing to the forefront transparency in what that experience looks like, and transparency into the pricing, and transparency into simpler terms and conditions. So that's one area, I think, where there's a clear opportunity to continue to remove the friction and make it much more easier to buy. And that's with that sponsor company that's putting together the trading partner integration collaboration program. But then the other side of that equation is that sponsor company isn't going to realize the value of implementing that program, even though it was easy to buy, if we don't also then do a like effort in removing the friction for their respective trading partners to also join the community, to become part of the network. And so when it comes to onboarding partners, getting the enterprises to communicate with each other, and then making that network built out in such a way that that then can scale. And once you're on board, you can communicate seamlessly across the infinite variety of trading partners on a network and handle the disparity in technology differences between companies, and handle the disparity in their preferred processes, and taking the friction out of that, so that the value from doing a supply chain program with their trading partners is realized by all the participants involved. So the friction point to remove is on the initial purchase from the sponsoring company, but just as important, the friction points then across the thousands of trading partners also needs to be likewise removed, or else that value isn't generated in a timely way.
No, that's a great point. I mean, ultimately, there's only so much a single company or that first tier of trading partners can do, right? I think, like you said, I mean, and I think this is where the real opportunity around a supply chain operating network is, or part of the value proposition, and we'll certainly can talk a little bit about that more later on, but it's really in enabling, those common processes or that common experience across that broader network, as opposed to it being a kind of a one-to-one, component. I also like the point you brought up earlier in terms of, which is kind of, I hadn't thought about that before, and what that would mean in terms of moving away from B2B, B2C, and really thinking about, business to individual, right? I think there is, a lot of buzz today, a lot of discussion today about, micro segmentation, and you're seeing that in the consumer world in terms of how you market to individuals, so on and so forth. I think there's an analogy there, or a parallel trend that could happen in the B2B realm in terms of really catering, communications and processes and so forth with, with individuals within the B2B ecosystem. Now, the other thing that gets a lot of discussion these days are millennials, right? Now, are you seeing, millennials kind of driving the change here in terms of trying to bring those B2C consumer buying experiences into the B2B realm, or, is this more across the board? Because obviously you and I are not millennials, but we also can appreciate the B2C experience.
What makes you say that, Adrian? Do I have some clues that give the fact that I'm not a millennial away? Huh? And then, of course, it's always fun when you have a Gen Xer like myself then having a commentary about millennials. But interestingly enough, I think there's an element of that millennial workforce in the supply chain that is making a lot of positive contribution to this changing dynamic of buying B2B type of services, in particular in supply chain. They definitely embrace technology. They embrace the social and different ways of communicating outside of the boundaries of email and other legacy types of ways to communicate with their business partners. So there's certainly an element of their experiences that's driving these changes, but I will say it's not exclusive to that group either. And so one of the examples that I hear oftentimes, even from people who are very senior folks within these large Fortune 500 companies that are far away from the millennial generation, they're experiencing these B2C experiences as well when they're consumers buying services or buying products for themselves. And so they do a business trip. They need transportation from the airport to the hotel. They pull out their smartphone. They call up the Uber app. They click on the tier of vehicle that they want. There's a map that appears. They can see that Uber driver right down to the minute on when that driver is going to pick them up. They're going to know if they want an estimate on the fare, as well as the time it's going to take to reach their destination. At the same time, there's plenty of people outside that millennial generation that is a regular of purchases on Amazon.com. And they have full transparency into not only the pricing, but to see reviews of other people who have purchased those products, in addition to see price comparisons between being an Amazon Prime direct customer and buying that directly from Prime, or the other merchants that are using the Amazon channel to buy through there. The product's purchased, the order is acknowledged, you see when the order is shipped, you see the different elements in the delivery process where your product is, and estimations right down to a relatively clear time frame on when that's going to hit your front door, and then when it's hit your front door, an acknowledgement that it's been dropped off there and delivered. And even a third example is what we can learn from the hotel brands, where you go on the different hotel sites, you become club members, you have visibility into all the reviews from different people who have stayed at the properties, both positive and negative, and the property's responses to those reviews before clicking on to make a reservation. So not all Holiday Inns or Hiltons or Marriotts are created equally, and I think people know that and appreciate the fact that those hotel brands are giving that information to all their prospective clients. And this is not exclusive to millennials, Gen Xers, baby boomers. I think all the decades of people are experiencing these things in the B2C world. So I'm getting questions all the time, or inputs back from the market that ask the very same things related to our business as a supply chain operating network. Why is it that I can see this in my Uber app, but to see where my rail car is, or my container, or my shipment is coming into my plant, or even more importantly, going out to my customer? Where is it? Is it going to be delivered on time? If it's going to be delivered late, am I going to be made aware of that before the customer calls me saying, where's my stuff? And so these experiences that are pretty now expected in the B2C world are translating very clearly into different elements of the supply chain where people are saying, I want that for my business experience and for me to help be a supply chain hero and manage my supply chain with a lot more control and visibility into what's going on, and to be able to then manage by exception and really handle the important stuff, as opposed to getting stuck in the mire of chasing a lot of things that are going well.
Well, I'm a Generation Xer myself, so I can relate to everything you just talked about. And again, I hear the same thing, from shippers and 3PLs and others as well in terms of what their expectations are today, right? And it's the same type of thing, right? And why can't we do in our business environment, have that same level of track and trace, have that same level of visibility, have that same level of user friendliness, to how we interact with our systems, so on and so forth. And I think that's what, quite frankly, is going to continue to drive innovation in this space. But then the question becomes, right, what are the main hurdles, right? How do we get from where we are today in the B2B world to where our expectations want to take us? I mean, what do you see as the main hurdles to get there?
Well, I think it's just really, I don't know, it's a lot of hurdles. Maybe it's definitely overcoming the legacy type of practices. We know what's worked, and there is a perceived risk or chance of stepping out of what you've done to stepping into being confident that that's going to be better. So I think a lot of the hurdles are more self-imposed than anything else. Where I do see from a positive perspective, a lot of companies, us included, in companies like ours, are stepping into these modern customer experiences through the products, making the applications mobile friendly, for example, putting modern user interfaces into the product that are far more intuitive, far more easy to consume the relevant information out of the screens and the applications, as opposed to applications that are big, heavy spreadsheet-oriented look and feels. Ones that don't require multiple page user guides to get started within them, and letting the interface be so intuitive and simple to where a person can get around pretty decently without a ton of heavy training or manuals in order to extract the value out of the application. So that's where I think I've seen a lot of progress made, not only here at Elemica, but across our peers in our space. But one of the things from a marketing perspective that I'd call out there is to say, don't confuse a user interface or a product enhancement or making something go mobile as saying then that's the exceptional customer experience that the modern buyer is expecting, because I think the definition of that high quality customer experience extends way beyond the look and feel of a product or an application or how somebody engages with the technology. And so the example I use is I'm a convertible guy. It's what I drive. I live in Atlanta. We get to use it, and I'm bragging here a little bit. We get to use our convertible almost 12 months out of the year. And so it's a good climate to have the car. In the business-to-business world, relating back to that user interface example, I think a lot of thoughts going into how the top retracts into the trunk, for example. Where are the buttons? How quickly does that top go down? How does that work and sound relative to how it orchestrates with the rest of the vehicle? But what's been, I think, a bit forgotten in this conversation with regard to that B2B buying experience is the fact that I'm not necessarily buying a particular convertible or a convertible in general because one top goes down in 7 seconds versus the other goes down in 5. Or one vehicle has a better placement for that button compared to another. I'm buying the convertible because I enjoy the wind through what's left of my hair, and I like the sunshine, and I like the sound, and just the whole vibe you get into when you're on a great 2-lane Georgia country highway and you're going 50 miles an hour, and there's a few light curves, and you're behind that wheel, and you're in control, and it's just an awesome experience to do that, at least for me. And it's really not about the fact that my top went down 2 seconds quicker than somebody else's, or the fact that they misplaced the button or the lever in order to make the top go down. And so I think the other hurdle to the conversation, in addition to the status quo, to wrap up this answer, is really about putting self-constrained limits or perceptions on what customer experience is. And the conversations have started really healthily around the products and around the applications and what that means and the interfaces, but that is not representative of 100% of the customer experience. I think the customer experience at the end of the day touches not only on that, but the lack of friction in the process, how smoothly the interactions are, what's the full ecosystem like in the supply chain operating network, and what does that mean for my company's economic prosperity, and what does that mean for the general health of the larger ecosystem that's on the business network. And certainly from a professional development standpoint, I think people like being heroes within their roles. So if they can become a supply chain hero, and we've helped enabled their position within their respective companies as a result of how we've been able to deliver value to that person within their role and helping them out, I think that's also equally part of that customer experience. That's not necessarily something that you can translate through product features, functions, and benefits.
A lot of great points there. Now, I wouldn't know what wind going through my hair would feel like in a convertible, but I imagine I may, if it's a little bit chilly out there, I may have to wear a hat if I'm convertible. But I think, joking aside, I think you touched upon a few, good points there. I mean, one is, and this is something that even I, have come to learn and appreciate, is that there is a difference between user interface and user experience, right? And I think a lot of times, and I know I've been guilty of this, have tended to interchange those two terms, but there are distinct differences. And I think your convertible example is a good example of kind of drawing the distinctions there. It's not so much of where you place the buttons and how many they are and how easy is it to use, right? That's the kind of the UI is the UI aspect of it, but it's more around how do you actually feel, right? When you're engaged in a process. I think the other piece that you brought up is that it goes really beyond the technology side. I want to get to technology in my next question now, but it really is a mind shift, right? There really has to permeate across not just the technology touch points between companies, but it's also, how do you deliver customer service, right? How is the sales process, right? How is the implementation process, and everything that's around there, the how easy is it to, work together, right? Around these different touch points that go beyond just, the initial buying experience or just the website interaction, if you will. So I thought that was another, good point. But, from my perspective, I know we've kind of talked about this a little bit about this in some of the luncheons that we're doing. I mean, I think one of the big hurdles that remains is some of the historical hurdle, which is, in order to get that beautiful visibility that we talked about and get that Uber-like experience in terms of where's my product and try to get the information you want in kind of a more frictionless way, you really have to break down your functional silos, right? Internally. Right. And then, obviously, across trading partners as well. And I think those are some, long-standing hurdles that I think that have nothing to do with technology that also need to be addressed in order to make this happen. Do you agree with that?
No, I totally agree. And in fact, I think technology is providing the channels or the gateways in order to create delightful customer experiences or high quality customer experiences, very modern customer experiences. But the technology is really only going to be as good as the willingness of the people to deploy those technologies in the right kinds of way across a supply chain operating network and the ecosystem of all the different players involved. And that's where I think, going back to the beginning of this conversation, where B2B companies can learn from those B2C companies, is because I think the reason, a lot of the reason why they're ahead in this game, generally speaking, is because they had that cultural and mindset mind shift happen as an inflection point across a broad array of companies earlier on in this process than the B2B companies. We both have access to the same technologies. We both have access to marketing automation. We both have access to robust CRMs. We both have access to social listening and social management technologies. B2C and B2B, we both have access to the same tools at our disposal in order to be able to target individuals where they're at in their role and in their buying journey, just like anybody else. And so I think one of the key differences is exactly that, the mind shifting into adopting and embracing that there is a better way to do this, and we're going to be all in on exuding that out into the marketplace.
Yeah, I mean the example that always comes to mind for me is obviously Apple, right? I mean, you can look at the iPhone and how that revolutionized the user interface and how we interact with, and use a smartphone and everything else. But it goes beyond that, right? And when you look at, entering an Apple store, they've completely transformed that retail, experience. It's very different when you walk into an Apple store and how you buy there and how the associates interact with you and how the checkout process is done versus, a Best Buy or some other, more traditional retailer. Same thing even with customer service, right? Where they've got their Genius Bar and the reserved for that. So they've really, gone beyond kind of the UI of the individual product and really kind of expanded that kind of to reimagine what a delightful, quote unquote, delightful customer experience is, extending it out to customer service and support as well as the retail buying experience as well. We've got a kind of running short on time here, so I've just got a couple of more questions here. Let's talk a little bit about, the supply chain operating network, which I believe is going to play an important role here. I've been a big proponent of the supply chain operating network model for many years. And, and for those of you that may not be familiar with supply chain operating network, it really brings together, software capabilities with B2B, trading partner connectivity, along with social networking, capabilities. And I see the integration of those three things via a supply chain operating network delivered via the cloud as being a key enabler of helping to bring, that B2C experience into the B2B realm. Obviously you're on the front lines of this. I mean, how are supply chain operating networks helping to transform the B2B, buying experience today? And how will it, how will supply chain operating networks continue to evolve in the years ahead to kind of further enhance the experience?
Well, I think I've used the term ecosystem a couple times earlier in this conversation. So at the heart of it, I think that's what a supply chain operating network is essentially doing, is creating an ecosystem to where if you're participating or you're an active participant in this ecosystem, you and your trading partners and all the other active participants across the trading partners are just creating a much more healthy ecosystem, and the more people are putting in, the more value they're able to extract from it, and it's also just creating an environment for economic prosperity for all the active participants. So in its base function, the ability to join a network, to use an analogy here like LinkedIn, you sign up, you create your profile. You can get on LinkedIn in a pretty fast and friction-free way. The platform is for business professionals to collaborate, share, and communicate across other business professionals around the world. Once you're within the LinkedIn ecosystem, your ability to communicate with any other participant on LinkedIn is seamless, and there's a ton of value to be gained in the community that LinkedIn has created, but that value is only going to be realized if you're participating as one of the participants within the ecosystem. If you're just sort of passively lurking or trying to hit LinkedIn for a couple of leads or looking for maybe a prospective employee, you're coming into the ecosystem with the wrong mindset, and you're not going to really be able to extract the kind of value that platform is there for you. And so like that, I think supply chain operating networks are able to do the same thing to create a environment where companies can join in an easy to do way. They can then begin to better communicate and collaborate with their current trading partners in an easy and friction-free way. And then in addition, to be able to expand their footprint, whether it be expand their supplier base through a partner discovery type of process, much like on LinkedIn, searching for other marketers, for example, to network with, or technology providers in order to use to help achieve what you're doing. Same thing in a supply chain operating network. If you're opening up a new plant in a different part of the world and want to know suppliers that can help feed that plant, you can go in and look and find them, and then with a click of a couple buttons be able to connect to those partners. Additionally, if you're wanting to extend your footprints into new markets and have other people to sell to within different regions, the supply chain operating network provides that ecosystem for you to discover potential new customers and to help create demand for your solutions. And then up your wheelhouse, Adrian, is certainly being able to assess who are the right carriers and expand your carrier footprint, and are the carriers that you're contracting with meeting the performance expectations, and if so, how well are they doing? And if not, what are some of my alternatives out there in the marketplace? And then in the supply chain operating network ecosystem, there's this whole element of social collaboration as well, that's breaking out the silos from one-to-one email or phone type of communications and more broadly communicating across the other active partners on the network. I think one of the elements to talk about the evolution then of the supply chain operating network is to create the ecosystem in the cloud and create it to be open to where you can have APIs. And so one network's not going to be able to build everything for everybody within the supply chain operating network. And so there are people looking for analytics applications, for example, or maybe some other B2B process applications that we do not provide but can benefit from the data on the network. And so the more, I think you're going to see more and more of the supply chain operating networks out there have like a Salesforce, force.com sort of marketplace, to where there's different applications and analytics engines that you can plug into from various providers that can build and plug into that technology backbone that's operating on the network. And I think this next level of evolution, I think, is leading, it's going to require a bit of a mind shift too, but leading to a network of networks type of philosophy. So Elemica certainly isn't the only supply chain operating network. There's various others out there in the marketplace. I think we all pretty well identify with the things that we do really well. For example, Elemica is the go-to business network for people who are in industrial process manufacturing. However, if you're in discrete or warehousing or retail, that's not where our strengths lie. We know what we're good at and we know what we're not. Conversely, there's other supply chain operating networks that are good in some of those areas, but not necessarily good in the industrial process manufacturing space, so on and so forth. And so will there be a cultural or community mind shift to say that there's elements that we do well, there's other elements that benefit the larger community that we might not do so well? And so is there a network of networks thing that could take place to where there's value to all the customers across everybody by having a bit more of a collaborative join, if you will, of the different networks out there? It's definitely not something we're going to see tomorrow, but there are more and more discussions around those sorts of network of network type approaches, and what are some of the ways that we could make some of those things work to benefit all our customers.
No, a lot of great points there. I mean, I think the whole concept of this federation of networks, if you will, or interoperability of networks, I firmly believe that that will ultimately, happen. And we see that already in the consumer world and in the, social networking world, right? If you go on LinkedIn, you can share things from LinkedIn to Facebook and vice versa, right? So you see, these social networks, interoperating, if you will. And I think you'll see this for the reasons you cited. I think you'll see the same kind of analogous types of collaboration and integration, if you will, between the various supply chain operating networks. We're out of time here, Ed, so I'm just going to go straight to my last question as a way to kind of wrap up. I mean, what steps should companies and their trading partners, start taking today to, close that gap between today's B2B, buying reality and, our expectations for how we want it to be in the years ahead?
I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to really gather in a better way the insights from the market, so it could be really clear on which of these B2C-like customer experience elements would be most beneficial to people in the supply chain world and trying to integrate and collaborate across enterprises. And so really looking for clear, tangible examples outside of saying, I want this Uber experience. But what does that mean very specifically then to take that Uber experience and apply it very specifically into your world of either fulfillment or inbound supply management or managing the transportation, logistics, or warehousing? And so what do those things look like? So we're really desiring to have a very intimate and honest, real, transparent conversation with not only our key customers, but also prospective customers within our space to translate these themes into specific and actionable things that we can deliver to the market that would be of immediate value generation for our customers and end users. And so what we're doing is working with analysts like yourself, Adrian, to do these very highly collaborative executive luncheons out there into the marketplace and have an honest dialogue without the sales pitch amongst active participants on the network to translate some of these themes into things that can be delivered upon and generate value. We're also separately from these executive luncheons hosting focus groups, and we've been doing those on a regular basis to get those inputs in a more scientific and structured way. So actively participating in those focus groups and the respective surveys that we've done that come out with those are certainly beneficial as well. And then at the end of the day, hold not only Elemica but the other supply chain operating networks out there accountable for delivery on creating these experiences into the experiences of working on a supply chain operating network. And so don't be shy and bashful and have honest reviews, put that feedback back into our teams here, whether it's through sales or marketing. We have our research and development teams here at Elemica working to create delightful experiences through our products on a regular basis. We have a whole team of product management that's also working to do the same. And so having that level of accountability and that honest feedback back into those groups is a very efficient way of then ensuring that we can turn around and continue to build these themes into where we are going forward as a company.
Now, a lot of great advice and activities you have going on there. I mean, I'm very excited about the future for this, and I think that really identifying where we want, it's the classic, right? Identify where we want to take this, but also understand what the current, roadblocks or what actions need to be taken to get there. And then, third and more important, as importantly, ultimately you need to build a business case around it. I mean, what's going to be the business benefit? What's going to be the benefit to our customers and trading partners, so on and so forth, and really being able to, clearly understand that and communicate that, I think is all going to, lead to progress in this area. Ed, like I always say at the end of all our episodes, we just always manage to scratch the surface on these topics, and I'm sure we could probably speak for another hour, but unfortunately we're out of time here. So Again, thank you very much for making the time and sharing your thoughts and perspective on this really exciting topic.
Well, thank you very much, Adrian. I really appreciate you having me on your program.
I want to thank those of you that joined us today. We didn't get any questions live, but if you're watching this program on demand and you have a question or a comment for Ed, you can post a question on talkinglogistics.com. You can find this episode there. And if you post a question there, I'm sure Ed will be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you all for joining us today and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.